Good afternoon, everyone, and peace be upon you. What a fantastic crowd. We'll get started, but before we begin, let's take a moment to reflect on the history of this land and its traditional owners, and let's collectively pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Kashif Bouns. You can call me Cash, but let me start with a question. Where are you from? Anyone? Where are you from? China? Ethiopia? There are a number of ways you can answer that question. And that's a question that I'd never been asked in my life, because where I grew up, everyone was like me. The first time I was asked this question was when I was driving taxis in Melbourne. On a typical day, a client will get in the car and they will ask me, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Hawthorne. And they would say, no, I mean, where are you really from? Or where are you originally from? And I would say, Pakistan. Next person gets in and they ask me, where are you from? And I say, I know the answer to this question. I'm from Pakistan. And they say, no, I meant, where do you live in Melbourne? And I would say, Hawthorne. So I could never seem to get it right. But eventually I figured it out. When someone asked me, where are you from? I would say, I'm originally from Pakistan, but I live in Hawthorne. And that way I covered all my bases. That question, where are you from, or where are you really from, took me on a learning journey that sees me standing in front of you today to talk about diversity. So today we'll look at diversity as a concept, then through my lived experience, before we move on and explore the exciting and emerging concept of sport for development. And finally, we'll look at how you, as an individual and as a business, can benefit from embracing diversity. How does that sound? Good? All right, so all I need from you is an open mind and active participation. Let me ask you this. What is diversity? Anyone? Come on, no wrong answers here. Safe environment? Cultural differences? Inclusion, gender, race, skin color, it's all of those things. Diversity is all around us. We're all diverse in more ways than one. Everyone in this room is unique and has a unique story. So let me share mine with you to set the context of how I became interested in diversity. Originally from Sialkot, a small city in Pakistan, I grew up in a tiny Gulf state called Kuwait. Has anyone been to Kuwait or Pakistan? Well, you? Oh, good. Which one? Karachi. So Pakistan and Kuwait, they're both wonderful places, right? I loved growing up there. But when I finished my high school, I wanted to go somewhere else for my higher education. I was looking at USA and UK as my main options, but in USA, they don't play cricket, and UK was simply too cold for my liking. So I was in a bit of a limbo. Australia, to be honest, was never on my radar. But as luck would have it, one day I was playing cricket with a couple of Aussies, and they recommended Melbourne as a study destination. And the moment they said Melbourne, my eyes lit up. And I remembered Pakistan winning the 1992 World Cup at the MCG. From that moment on, my heart was set on Melbourne. I arrived in Melbourne in February 2005 and graduated with a degree in accounting and finance in early 2008. Times were good back then. The economy was booming and there were plenty of jobs in the market. I already had a couple of offers. But I thought to myself, I'll go back to Pakistan, I will see my family, and I will come back and start a new career. What a silly decision that was. When I returned in a couple of months, the economy had busted and there were no more jobs. We were in the middle of the global financial crisis. I kept looking, and in the meantime, I took any job that came my way. I worked as a pizza delivery driver, I worked as a security guard, I worked in a factory, worked in a restaurant, and as I said earlier, I even drove taxis. And out of all the jobs that I've done in my life, cab driving was by far the most interesting and most confronting job that I ever did. And while I found myself in physical danger at times, nothing impacted me more than people questioning my identity. I had to face questions on a daily basis that ordinary Australians don't have to. Questions that made me feel uncomfortable, questions that made me question myself, and questions that made me question my identity. It was heartbreaking and painful, but it was also character building. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on my identity and ultimately embrace it with a passion. I became comfortable in my skin, literally, and also found my purpose, which was to serve my community by connecting people and building bridges. I realized that accounting wasn't my passion. No disrespect to any accountants in the room. So, I realized that accounting wasn't my passion, and I decided that if I was to truly live my passion, I needed to find myself a job in the community sector. As a new migrant, that was a very risky decision, but it was a decision that changed the course of my life. As a part of my new career, I had an opportunity to work in diversity as a sector as opposed to my lived experience, and I was also introduced to this beautiful concept of sport for development. Let me tell you how. When I started looking for a job in the community sector, the first job that I came across was at Cricket Victoria in their community department. Now, I loved cricket and I loved community. This was a marriage made in heaven. All I had to do was to take newly arrived migrants and refugees to cricket games, and I could not believe I got paid for it. Once the cricket season finished, I had an opportunity to go and work for Essendon Football Club, and at that stage I'd never been to a football game. I sort of barracked for Hawthorn because I lived in Hawthorn, and I also knew which team not to support because people had told me, Cash, living in Melbourne, one day you will find yourself supporting a football team, and when you do, make sure it's not Collingwood. Right? So I was very honest and upfront with Essendon in my interview, and I said to them, look, I don't know much about the club or its history or the game, but I'm willing to work hard and I'm willing to learn. Luckily, they backed me in, and I was able to deliver a very successful program. From there, I progressed at Essendon, and then I went to the AFL and did a couple of national roles in their diversity unit. And 3 years ago, I joined Western Bulldogs Football Club as their general manager community. All this was possible because I was able to embrace my identity and find my purpose. I started from a place where I found out that I was different, to a place where I felt that that difference was my weakness, to a place where now I feel that that difference is my strength. In the space of a few years, I went from a cab driver to an executive at an AFL club. And all this time working in sport opened my eyes to the power of sport in uniting communities. The power of sport in uniting communities has been realized by some of the best and biggest leaders in the world. Nelson Mandela, for example, understood the power of sport. Have you watched the movie Invictus? Anyone? If you haven't, please do, and you will see how Nelson Mandela used sport to unify South Africa. He has many famous quotes, but one of his quotes is, sport has the power to change the world, and it has power to unite people like nothing else can. And it's a quote that I've seen come to life for almost every single day over the last 10 years. I witnessed the power of sport, the power of diversity, and power of community. I've had so many wow moments and so many stories to tell, but let me share one with you. This is a story of a young boy who was born in war-torn South Sudan. He came to Australia as a refugee in 2006 as a 6-year-old and settled in the western suburbs of Melbourne. While at primary school, he was introduced to this funny game called footy via the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation. He was a quick learner and impressed everyone with his skills. His talent caught the eyes of the AFL scouts, and he found his way into the Western Bulldogs Next Generation Academy, which is a development program for multicultural and Indigenous athletes. In 2018, he became the first South Sudanese player to be drafted by Western Bulldogs. Fast forward a few months, and now we're in the summer of 2018. Melbourne is in the grip of the so-called African gang crisis. Melbourne's West is in the news for all the wrong reasons. As the community club of the AFL located in Footscray, the community looks at us for support. And in consultation with the community, we've become the first sporting club in Australia to launch an African Action Plan. And the cornerstone of that African Action Plan is the Goal Mentoring Program, where our AFL and AFLW players will mentor young African Australians. When we put it to our playing group, almost everyone puts their hand up. But one player stands out. It's the young South Sudanese recruit who has only been at the club for a few months, but is already willing to give back. His name is Buku Hames, and he only became an Australian citizen in January this year, but he's already giving back. His story is one of many inspiring stories that showcase the power of sport in uniting communities. So what can we, as a society at large, can learn from sport when it comes to embracing diversity? When I share stories like Buku's in rooms like this or other forums, people will say to me, Kash, it's an inspiring story, and we understand the importance of engaging with the multicultural communities and the indigenous communities and LGBTIQ and people with all abilities, but ultimately we've got a business to run. We've got limited resources and we need to focus on our core business. And I ask them, do you want to grow your business? And almost always the answer is yes. And I say, diversity can help you grow your business. Let me tell you how. And I ask them a question which I'll ask you now. Do you know what percentage of Australians is classified as multicultural? That is, they're either born overseas or have one parent born overseas. Any guess? 50%, roughly 50%. So half of the population, right? Did you know that by 2025, overseas born families will outnumber locally born families? Now, I'm not here to talk about if immigration is good or bad. These are cold, hard stats, right? So is it good for your business to engage with those community, or is it actually only just a nice thing to do, right? It's good for your business, isn't it? Now let's look at it from another angle. McKinsey and Company did a research in 2015, and they found that companies with culturally diverse executives were 33% more likely to generate above average profits. And companies with culturally diverse board members were 43% more likely to do the same. Now you tell me, if to have a culturally diverse workforce is just a nice thing to do, or is it good for business? It is both, right? Now at that stage, they start to come around and they say, okay, we get it, it's good for our business, but how do we do it? And I say, I'm glad you asked. Let me give you an example. Has anyone heard of the Rooney Rule? So the Rooney Rule came out of the NFL in America. Did you know that 70% of all players in NFL are of African American heritage? 70%. But if you looked at their coaching list a few years ago, there were no African American coaches. And Dan Rooney, who was the owner of one of an NFL teams, realized this. And he brought in this rule where for any coaching jobs, you had to interview an African American. You did not have to hire them. You did not have to give them a second round interview. You had to simply interview a person. And on the back of that small change, in 2018, NFL had 8 minority coaches, which is a record for them. Now, since its inception, Rooney Rule has been adopted by a number of other sports. For example, NASCAR has a Drive for Diversity program. And remember the story I just told you of Buku Hames and the Next Generation Academy in the AFL? That was inspired by Rooney Rule as well. But the Rooney Rule's influence is not just limited to sport. Organizations across all business sectors have adopted Rooney Rule to help them embrace diversity. So what does it mean for your business or your organization? It doesn't have to be the Rooney Rule or the Next Generation Academy. All your business needs to do is find what works for them, have a crack, and find a way to reflect the community and grow their business. So what are some of the things we've looked at today? Number 1, be proud of who you are and love yourself for who you are. Number 2, find your purpose and do your best to live it. If you love what you do, you will never have to work a day in your life. Thirdly, we looked at the concept of sport for development. And lastly, we built a business case for the businesses to embrace diversity using Rooney Rule as a practical example. So what are we going to walk away with? Let's close our eyes and imagine a salad bowl. And what you will see all these beautiful ingredients that retain their individuality and yet come together to create this beautiful salad bowl. Now let's think of the human race as a salad bowl where each of us is celebrated for our uniqueness rather than expected to blend in. So what are we going to walk away with? Let's walk away a little bit more open-minded towards diversity. Let's walk away a little bit more curious about one another. And let's together build a future where diversity makes us better. Thank you.